Hello, everyone. It's Frances Widdowson here. I was a professor at Mount Royal University until I was wrongfully terminated in December 2021. And one of the reasons why I was terminated was because of my views on the residential schools, which were seen as being unacceptable at the university. Anyway, my case is being appealed before the Labor Relations Board. But what I'm doing in the meantime is I'm trying to develop a number of documentaries on academic freedom generally, but also academic freedom as it pertains to a number of very important issues. The two most significant that I've been involved with are trans activism and materials pertaining to indigenization, and more specifically, the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So, as part of this documentary, I've been doing what's called a treatment. And a treatment is basically sketching out what's going to be happening during this documentary. And I'm going to be doing a documentary on uncovering the grave error at Kamloops. And I have been investigating a whole bunch of different factors to try to flesh out this treatment. And one of the things that I was doing is that because of the presentation that was made by Sarah Bolio, or Bollier, I think she pronounces her name, on July 15th, and all the arguments that she was making were really not substantiated about what she claimed to be probable burials. She did argue that the only way to determine whether there were burials in Kamloops was to excavate. And so I was curious about what's been done and what was the whole process about excavation. Because for people who've watched other videos that I've done on the Kamloops case, Blacklock's reporter released a large number of documents pertaining to this in January 2025. So just a couple of months ago, it was about a 260-page document. And I just started going through that. I had gone through it very sketchily before, but it's very difficult because there's all sorts of redacted documents. It's very difficult to follow because it's not in chronological order. And as I was doing more of a deep dive into these documents, I was quite amazed to find several documents which flesh out what the Kamloops band was proposing in terms of excavations. Anyway, so what I wanted to do just briefly is give you, just to explain, because I put this on the WokeAcademy.info site. I'm just going to share my screen with you. I wanted to show you the WokeAcademy.info site, which has the documents on it. And then I wanted to just briefly go through these documents to indicate to you the importance of them. So these documents are incredibly important. They're going to be brought into the documentary. But because of everything that's happening with respect to James Heller and Dallas Brody and everything that's going on with respect to the Kamloops case, I thought that a very short documentary or a very short video on these documents would be a good idea. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. And what I wanted to show you first was the WokeAcademy.info site. And this is a great site that I've put a lot of work into, and a number of other people have been involved as well. But it has materials. It's WokeAcademy, www.wokeacademy.info, has materials on my arbitration decision, which is very interesting. Also, reasons why I was fired. But what we're interested in is this post on the right-hand side, Blacklock's documents on funding Kamloops Indian Residential School excavations. So the word excavations was specifically used in these documents. And I think that's very telling because for a long period of time, we weren't quite sure what the Kamloops band had requested funding for. And they actually did request funding for excavations. And the fact that they have not done those excavations is very telling and could even be claimed to be fraud because they did, as far as I understand it, they did pocket that money that was supposed to be going to excavation. So if you just go into this this document, this post, I have this amusing image, right? Because it's really the anomalies which have been confirmed, which could be anything, not child matters, every child matters, which is what we heard for years on end about this issue. Anyway, here's the document that you can just take a look at your leisure. What you do is you go into the tools, that chevron on the right-hand side, and you go into presentation mode. And what the presentation mode does is it just allows you to go through all these documents. And you, as I said, you can just look at them at your leisure. So that's these documents. Very, very important, incredibly important. And I'm going to be using them in this documentary called Uncovering the Grave Error at Kamloops. I'm going to be traveling to Kamloops, going to be traveling to Abbotsford, where Sarah Bollier is a professor, and also the Simon Fraser University, which has an archaeology department, which is part of the entire hysteria that took place. And that gives you a bit of a sense of the problems in universities, which I'm very interested in because of my academic freedom, my interest in academic freedom. So that is that. Those documents. I just wanted to stop the share for that. And now what I want to do is I want to go into my actual PDF file, which is easier for me to use. The reason why I'm not remaining in that WokeAcademy.info site is it's difficult for me to converse with you using it. But what I want to do is share my screen again, and this time look at the PDF that I have that I just wanted to talk to you about. And the document is 19 pages long, and it starts off on June 5th, 2021, which is a very, very important date because this was when there was all sorts of discussions happening, and there were very high-level discussions in the federal government. And Christine Fox is I believe she's the deputy minister of one branch of what used to be Aboriginal and Northern Affairs, which is Crown Indigenous Relations. She's the deputy minister, but she's liaising with a whole bunch of different other federal departments, the most important being the Privy Council. And I just wanted to give you look. So like a few hours after she sent this email, and you can see it's all redacted. This is Blacklock stuff. She's saying something. We don't know what it is, but it's all redacted. And then in response to her is an email from Sean Tupper, who is a high-level bureaucrat in the office of the Privy Council, and she's talking about a meeting that is going to be taking place on in a day or two, and he says it's going to be quite a meeting. There's a redacted area, and then he says it's a small nuance, I know, but may be important in the future as more facts are clarified. We don't know what he's referring to, but I suspect it had to do with the language about whether graves have been discovered or whether they are possible graves, potential graves, probable graves, this kind of language. And what you see is in Christine Fox's email on June 7th, when she's talking about this meeting that took place, stated on June 7th is the comment in response to the discovery at what could be remains of children at the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. So this was sent on June 7th. This shows you that there's a tentative approach by the federal government on June 7th. That's all going to change, as we're going to see shortly. So a month later, and it's between the week of July 5th to 9th. We're not exactly sure the date because we just see this and the various documents surrounding it. It's in the week because it was 1 week before a July 16th meeting with the government. They keep on mentioning last week this came in. And what we see here is Kamloops Indian Residential School Ancestral Remains Excavation. That is the funding request. So they're directly asking for funds to do excavations. And this as well is before the July 15th Beaulieu presentation, where Beaulieu states that you have to do excavations to confirm whether remains have been found. So this is very much a part of what's happening at this particular time, which is July 2021, just before Beaulieu's presentation, or Beaulieu's presentation. And it's all redacted. You can see there's activities, there's expenses, it's all redacted. You get more documents about this, giving a bit of a sense of what the kinds of activities are going to be and their estimated cost. That's redacted. Interestingly, you see a lot of legal support being argued for, which of course is the Aboriginal industry getting money for their various legal disputes surrounding this. So that's an interesting aspect, but you do have forensic archaeology experts, so presumably for excavations. And then we have the meeting that took place that refers to that other document being received the previous week. That meeting took place on July 16th, 2021. This is an account from July 17th from David Russell, who is a bureaucrat. He's the Burial Sites at Indian Residential Schools, Indigenous Services Canada. So he's a bureaucrat. He's an observer at this meeting. And the meeting for the Kamloops Indian Band features Travis Anderson and counselors Jeanette Jules, Katie Godfredson, and Marie Baptiste, and their counselors. And then we have the bureaucrats from Crown Indigenous Relations, Mandy McCarthy, Celine Marks, and Alex Mass. And this gives you a sense of what they're talking about at this time. They're very interested in funding. The band is the kinds of funds that they get. They don't want there to be caps on that. You can take a look at what they're talking about with respect to that meeting. As well, David Russell does more of a summary of what happened in the meeting, and he's talking about this request for the $9.255 million for this, and that there is ability to meet this demand for that funding request, right? Just so people know, that was, you can see that funding there, $9.255 million. And there's some interesting things said in this summary, right? They're not going to fund the $700,000 requested for legal fees, the Aboriginal industry. That's going to have to come out of the band's budget itself. They're talking about exhumation and DNA forensics. And also the forensic cost is based on only 215 possible sites. So again, tentative. They're going to have another meeting on July 19th, and the band is working with the coroner, which is interesting because the coroner was saying in Dre Humphrey's documentary that ground penetrating radar is not a way to confirm whether remains are there. So they obviously didn't have a very in-depth discussion with the coroner. July 16th, 2021. So those two accounts were made after the fact, but this email actually just took place that evening. I believe it's 9:27 p.m. from Celine Marks, who's one of these bureaucrats who was at the meeting. And what she's saying is that they're going to have to, sort of reorganize their application for that 9.2 million, 9.3 million, and into local research engagement, knowledge gathering, memorialization, commemoration, and bringing children home. Bringing children home is, of course, the excavations, and putting those if there are remains, sending those remains back to their communities. But of course, we have to do the excavations to determine whether there are actually remains. And then she says, please confirm that the discussions on exhumation and identification of remains has been made with other affected communities, right? So that they have consent if you're going to dig up these supposed remains, which of course no one, it's highly improbable that there are remains, but everyone is kind of making assumptions which is part of our huge mistake. And in terms of trying to uncover the grave error, that was a huge grave error because there were no confirmed, remains. And so why is everyone assuming this when not one parent has said that their child never returned home? So that is an email that happened right after that meeting, trying to just get the application changed. Then we have another email on July 20th by Amanda McCarthy. This was talked about quite a bit by Blacklocks. And what McCarthy is doing is making sure the band kind of understands what's involved with forensics, right? And saying that they're not trying to intervene, right? Because they're not going to control what's going on, but DNA testing protocols, this is a very complex process and you should be aware of this. So she's just kind of trying to talk to them about this. I believe they do have a meeting about this at some point, or maybe this was after the meeting took place. Anyway, she's trying to warn them about the difficulties of doing this. We shouldn't be assuming, because of course you have to excavate to see whether that's the case. And then we start getting into the application, which is made on August, updated. You can see here, final update, August 26th. Bringing children home, that was the reorganization that was requested, talking about archaeological work. And then we can see the activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, which is to conduct the forensic archaeological excavation of the 215 ancestors identified by the ground penetrating radar. So on August 26th, we already started to see the language starting to change to become more certain. That's an interesting question as to why that happened. Presumably it's because of what the media and all the Indigenous activists, they're kind of lobbying that was happening. And then I don't know when this document was produced. Perhaps it was September 15th because it comes after an email, but it's this, all these documents are mixed up. Anyway, you can see the activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. This is bringing children home. We have 2021 to 2022. That's that funding year. And then 2022 to 2023 to archaeological excavation of the 215 ancestors identified by the ground penetrating radar in both of those funding years. And then we have more details about this in terms of the funds, and they're going to, as deliverables, have a number of potential burial locations. So they're going to be looking for potential burials, and then they're going to identify remains if they find those burials in both 2021 to 2 and 2022 to 2023, and they're going to deliver these. That's what they're getting funding for. You see the specific amounts: $1.6 million for 2021 and $1.6 million for 2022, and then they're going to get an additional $592,000 for the security, right? So all these amounts together amount to $7,386,000, plus you have the $592,000 for security. Anyway, this hasn't been signed yet, so the dates and everything are a little bit uncertain and as to whether it actually was the final document, but it is referenced in other documents with Blacklock. October 6th, so we had September 30th, Truth and Reconciliation Day, right, which was sparked by the Kamloops, the supposed discovery of the remains, and the flags at half-mast, all these things happening. Anyway, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, had been invited to go to Kamloops to commiserate with Casimir about the unmarked graves, but he went off to Tofino on vacation with his family, which caused great outrage. And so he said that he was going to be planning a visit to the Kamloops band's area very soon, and was very contrite and said that he regretted what he'd done. And this, of course, put pressure on the government to make it seem more certain that remains had actually been discovered. And what you see on October 14th is you see a change in language. So this is this amount, 7.9 million. That included the security costs. So that was like 7.2 or 7.3 plus the security costs. This is going to be relocating loved ones to their home community. So we're accepting that there are unmarked graves there, and we're going to have to send children back to their communities. And then we're starting to talk about, the loss of Indigenous children, the tragic news of the location of the First Nations children's remains at the Kamloops Residential School. So this has not been substantiated, but already in October 2021, when we saw it in July, it was more tentative. Now it's just being accepted as being the case. Anyway, this was signed on to supposedly October 22nd, 2021. And the Prime Minister Trudeau went to the Kamloops, to sort of apologize to the Kamloops band on October 18th. And actually a petition was sent to the government making all sorts of demands and saying that the remains of 215 children had been found at that October 18th, 2021 meeting. Anyway, this is now May 22nd, 2023. What we see is that these, it's now certain, the 215 missing children, so this is 2 years later, or a year and a half later, there's no more possible, no more potential, no more probable. It's just related to the 250 missing children and burial sites. They do reference, though, the amounts, right, that we were talking about before, the $7.9 million funded by the government, but no mention of the excavations, which it was almost half of that was supposed to be for excavations, which were never done. And then we have press releases on May 23rd, 2023, the 215 burial sites done in a press release. And when we had the minister visiting the Kamloops band, there's this large amount of ceremonial activities. And finally, at the end, we had a visiting. She visited the sacred site. I'm not sure. I heard it was Carolyn Bennett, but that seems like, I think it would be Mark Miller who would be the minister, or no, maybe it is Indigenous Services. I get confused, but I believe it was Carolyn Bennett. Anyway, she for between 4:15 and 4:45, she visited the sacred site of the 215 unmarked burial sites. And if you go to Kamloops now, you'll see the fence. You're not allowed to take photos and so on because they say it's a sacred site. But of course, we have nothing substantiated there. So it's just the anomalies. So the sacred anomalies. And then finally, July 14th, 2023. So now we are firmly ensconced in this kind of way of referring to things. They're talking about 215 burial sites. This is from the same person who was sending out these emails in 2021, being much more tentative. He says that the 215 unmarked burial sites have been located. They're called the missing now. This way continues to deal with deniers who threaten to dig up the site, right, which has never been confirmed. That seems to be an invention by the band. The band never called the police or anything like that about that. We never heard about it till after the fact. And then it talks about the funding, all the new kinds of funding which are going to be offered, which of course we had funding that was given that was never spent on what it was supposed to be spent on. So it's really quite amazing that there's more money, more additional $12 million going for a healing lodge and all these sorts of things. Anyway, I know that was a bit of a quick run through. It's my happy hour here in Calgary. But I thought that those documents were so important that I didn't want to just let them sit for another day. As I said, I'm working through a whole bunch of these areas, such as what we knew initially. Then we had the excavations. Then we had the deception that went on. And then we now have the attacks on truth that are going on with the James Heller and the Dallas Brody case. And so these are all now coming together in this treatment that I am producing for this documentary called Uncovering the Grave Error at Kamloops. Thanks very much for listening.